Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
Hi, everybody. This is David, and welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast. Glad to be back. Was on vacation up in Superior and Duluth. One of the days up there was 55 degrees for a high with 44 degrees wind chill, a brisk wind blowing in off of Lake Superior, which had a surface temperature of 39 degrees. So yes, much different, and looking to be in the 80s here tomorrow. So today we are going to talk, it's going to be a little bit more intellectual again in our conversation, but you know what? You are an audience that appreciates new information that you can go out and you can share with others, and information that is going to hone your safety skills and your awareness. So we're going to talk about what Sophie's Choice, now what it means to make a Sophie's Choice, how artificial intelligence will change rescues, and we're also going to look at some 9/11 or September 11, 2001 research design. As you know, I'm working on a book which is due, I think, in 6 weeks to my publishing house on the rescue 500,000 people from Lower Manhattan on September 11th, 2001. And I have, kind of a different a different hinge for my rationale of the effectiveness of that versus what's been more mainstream in research. And I want to point out, I think, some of the more traveled avenues in research and why people go down those avenues versus maybe the approach that I've taken. So a few anecdotes, okay? One is I do have a boom right now and a shock mount. So completely new. The microphone's up a little bit closer to me instead of having to sit on literally 15 notepads. It is in front of me right now, and I can adjust it, which is really nice, and move it off to the side and store it. A thank you to Hector Solis from Typical Daddy Podcasts for helping me configure the different components I needed to make this possible. And Typical Daddy has a new season coming up, and also a new special awareness branch off of their podcasting. So look for Typical Daddy to be coming out with some tremendous, insightful, resourceful podcasts very soon. So we are in the midst of a bathroom remodel, actually 2 bathrooms right now in our house, which are the only 2 bathrooms in our house. They're being done in succession, though, because obviously to renovate both bathrooms at the same time creates some logistical issues. And when we left for vacation, the I guess builders, we've worked with the same crew since we've lived in this house for 15 years. They put a roof on, windows, and other things, and have done just exceptional work. But it literally took them, they brought in a dumpster and in 2 hours to completely gut the existing bathroom, like gut to the studs, drywall gone, subfloor gone. I mean, just everything. And then, to move on from there. So we returned, and they currently have the floor down. We picked out a porcelain tile that we're going to be using for the floor, shower, and then actually it's going to be on a couple walls. And then they put a 4-foot piece of drywall up to block the entrance to the bathroom, because you can't go in for 24 hours as the tiles set. And it was for us, that we wouldn't accidentally go in, but we also have 2 cats, and one cat is about 30 pounds. So they said actually that cat walking in that room, and he's very curious, could shift the placement of some of those tiles. So it's completely blocked off from about, to about 4 feet, and you can still look in if you need to. So exciting time, having some updates done on the house. We've had it updated much after 15 years. It was funny because when we moved here, and looked around the town. I remember we drove past this house and we thought, there's no way we're going to set up a time to go through that house. There was a large TV antenna that was rusting, and it had the typical rust marks that went down the shingles, and it had a broken backboard and just overgrown. There was a bush in the front that was literally as high as the first story of the house. And anyway, though, it's really a sound house. It was really built well. It's in a terrific neighborhood. We're only a couple blocks from all of the schools, and the high school is new and everything. So it's really a great location, good neighbors. So when we bought the house, we had a lot of work to do on renovating it and updating it. And this was kind of the last step that we never had gotten to, or the 2 bathrooms. We did just a little bit, but just to totally gut them out and to rebuild them and add more space. And go with a different design too in the main bathroom, kind of lay things out in a different style, meaning they had to move some of the plumbing and ducting and things like that. But with my daughters, definitely we needed the storage, too. So we went with a floor to ceiling storage unit. So exciting, it's exciting when you're 45 for stuff like that. Probably when you're 25, it's not that exciting, but it is exciting, right now to have that develop. So, and dun, 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 dun. On our way up to Superior, we go through a community of Minong, Wisconsin. You might know it better for being the home of Jack Link's beef jerky. So I think they had a commercial in the Super Bowl a few years ago. They have a big Sasquatch. That's kind of their thing. Anyway, they have the beef jerky outlet. So they take all the beef jerky. I don't know what the story is behind it. The stuff that didn't make the cut or excess and whatever. And they bag it up and vacuum seal it. And you can buy, just super cheap at this outlet store in town. Super cheap. It's part of a grocery store, and they have this section where, they just bring the stuff in. So I loaded up on 6 pounds of jerky, at a fraction of the price that I pay for it. And I didn't realize, I never knew this. Okay. So I'm reading the bag of jerky and it says refrigerate after opening. And I'm like, I've had beef jerky, like literally that I've opened and have probably eaten like a year later, because I take it when I bike, it's something I pack, and I'm like, ooh, I didn't know about this steadfast rule that you have 3 days to eat beef jerky. So you got 6 pounds of jerky that I'm going to have to manage pretty well here. Cause again, it is something I take out with me biking, but yeah, I was like, I'm going to defy that rule. Refrigerate beef jerky after, nope, never done it. So, the Safety Dog podcast is now on Stitcher. So you can find the show on Stitcher. I want to give a thank you to the 405 Media, John Grant and the 405 Media. This show airs daily at 2 p.m. You can go to the 405media.com, listen to this show, and also the League of Extraordinary Podcasters, basically a podcast radio station. Check it out, the405media.com. Also, thanks to ISS 24/7, which you can see in the background if you are watching on YouTube. ISS 24/7, keeping large venues safe, including the National Football League, the NCAA, shopping malls, and other population-dense areas. They use an app-based incident management system. It's the best in the world. ISS 24/7. Sprigeo, Sprigeo, Sprigeo.com, the nation's leader for school reporting of bullying, threats, and harassment. So Sprigeo, Sprigeo.com. Also, Auphonic, Auphonic. Auphonic is a supporter of the show. Auphonic leveling you can purchase, very reasonable. I think it's $89. You can put your podcast into it, and it will bring it up to industry standards for radio and for podcasting. Basically, the best interface I've ever seen in my life. You take your recorded file, your audio file, you drag it, put it into the box in the user interface, and you press process. does its magic and comes out and gives you a little bit of a data report of saying what it did. And boom, you have an excellent recording, especially when you have multiple channels, like if I'm interviewing somebody. And I do now have the capability to do the Skype phone interviews where I can call somebody off of Skype. So I no longer have to set up my cell phone hooked into an external speaker, hooked into, all this other stuff, which just didn't give me very good quality before. So that has increased significantly. It will be very important for some of the guests that we have coming up. Some of the artwork or the sponsor logos, I guess artwork in the background, will be changing very soon, and of course being updated. Also, I want to give a thank you out to Larry Roberts of the Readily Random podcast, readilyrandom.com. Listen to his captivating interviews. I've listened to all of them. He recently had Sean Fuller on, who talked about what it's like to overcome drug addiction, and the stories that Sean would share that, anything that in his possession was for sale. So if he had his bicycle or a couple bikes, they would be sold for drugs and the culture, of where he worked, of just everybody using drugs. And Sean has, had a podcast of over 100 episodes, very intellectual, very engaging stories. But I think what I took away from that, I listened to it a few times, is, it can happen to anyone, and it's hard to break the cycle, and really motivating and kind of hard story, I think, for Sean to tell. Although, Larry is a phenomenal interviewer, and worked with Sean, and it's upbeat and informative. But I think it gives you an insight into the world of somebody who has a severe addiction and working through that addiction and coming out the other side and working hard to not have a relapse. So, and this week, with his guest, dun, 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 dun. This is where you can bring up the art of the internet. Dun, 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 and sing cool songs to you. Joe Navarro, a retired agent for the FBI, talked about very astute monitoring of people's behaviors and using that to his advantage, and then sharing tips that everybody could use to help stay safe. And that was incredible, the stories that were shared during that interview. So again, readilyrandom.com. Larry Roberts, a true professional, and you're going to get a show there that is very tightly produced, maybe about 40 minutes in length, and just these fascinating human interest stories. I was a guest on the show. I was very fortunate to be brought in as a guest by Sean a few episodes ago. But yeah, Sean didn't bring me in as episode as a guest, Larry did, but readilyrandom.com. Also, check out the book Reconnaissance Man by Aaron Clary. I wrote a review on Amazon, posted it today. Aaron was a guest on my show about a month ago. We talked about agency and purpose related to Reconnaissance Man, and the importance, if you're young and unencumbered, let's say ages 17 to 25, to get out, experience the country, identify places that you could say, hey, I might live here. This could be a place for me, place you might want to go to school, might want to pursue employment. Again, like if you're really into hiking and warm weather and things like that, maybe Minnesota isn't going to be the place for you. So, he does I think a wonderful job in that book, identifying why to do reconnaissance, moving then into kind of the mechanics of reconnaissance, such as even if you have to sleep in your car, and not that, if you don't do that, that's fine. But I think he takes away the barrier of there's you can find a way to do it. And then he brings it, of where to start. I mean, if you're a novice to reconnaissance. And Aaron does a nice job too of pointing out that reconnaissance is this first trip through. you're kind of getting the lay of the land, and then you're going to go back into areas that are of interest to you and investigate those more for like post-secondary opportunities, what the economy is like, housing costs, cultural, attributes, things like that. And he talks about his own experiences, but he doesn't give you an agenda to follow, which is great, because you need to set your own agenda and your own interest. It's not one of these books that lays everything out and it's like, just follow this. He gets you to think about things, and I appreciate it. I downloaded it on audible.com, listened to it several times. It was narrated by Jim Fear, who did a tremendous job with the narration. So again, Reconnaissance Man by Aaron Clarey. You can find it on Amazon. It's available in many formats. Please visit letusgetnerdy.com. Letusgetnerdy.com. See what Elijah and his friends are up to there. Always sharing fascinating but relatively obscure, history and science stories. We did a co-show, so he is from Canada. We did a co-show last week. It was longest show I've ever done. We're going to do a follow-up, maybe, in a month or so, kind of narrow it in a little bit. But one of the things I learned during that show, I learned many things, but I didn't know that Chicago, because it was at sea level, couldn't have a regular sewer system. So they needed to go kind of block to block and raise the buildings, like a dozen feet or so they could actually put in this sewer system. But, it might not sound like anything significant until you go back to when that actually happened, and the fact that allowed Chicago then to grow as a city. And had something like that not happen, it probably would have never developed into what it is today. So, and we talked a lot about, artificial intelligence and singularity and what happens to religion, if people can live forever. We're getting closer to that, folks. We're getting closer. What happens if people can live forever? And you don't have to be concerned for physical death, because, you could be cloned, or you could just have a chip built into you that would constantly upload, the bioelectrical impulses in your brain. So it would always have a momentary scan of what you were thinking, all that. So if something did happen to you, a tree falls on you and kills you, that database could be accessed, and your DNA, and basically you could be put into another body and just continue. So, what does that mean? What does it mean for religion? Just what does it mean? Would you want that to happen? if you could live for 1,000 years or indefinitely, would you want that? And Elijah and I had different positions on that. I said no. I think he was more in the camp of yes for that. And he pointed out something I didn't think about much, and I've thought about it much since our show. And he said, you really have like 85 years of life. And it's short. Think about it. 85 years. You're trying to get established, get up the corporate ladder, get a family, get some time for yourself. And then, toward the end of life, your body isn't isn't functioning as well as when it was younger, and so forth. So, you do have this, that 85 years is kind of a small window. So he said, what if you expand it out to 200-300 years? You can do a lot more things. You're not going to be as pressed to try to compress all these things in. And I'm thinking yeah, that's absolutely true, because if we look at the typical, for example, American lifestyle, I went back and I looked in 1800 in the United States, the average lifespan, 40 years, okay, in 1800. So, we've more than doubled that, right now, and brings up some real challenging ethical questions. So we're going to talk about specifically artificial intelligence and rescues, because what's happening with artificial intelligence, the algorithms being built in, would be, probabilities. So if you had, this situation versus this situation, empirically, whatever data was gathered and put into this AI system, it would be able to give you probabilities of saying this is your best option, this is your second best, third best option, from a very empirical standpoint. But then it removes emotion. And for example, there was a scene in I, Robot with Will Smith early on. I think he plunged into a body of water with his car, and it was him, and there was so he's an adult and there was a child, and this robot went in the water to rescue, to conduct a rescue, and did some scan and identified that Will Smith as an adult was a more probable rescue than this girl, and he's yelling, "No, save her!" Pointing to her, "Save her!" And they save him instead, and she isn't saved. So it's those types of things that come into play. So artificial intelligence is not consciousness. We kind of mix those two up, and it's built on algorithms, and we're still quite a ways off. I mean, we're going to have AI be a part of rescue. There's no doubt about that. But it is, I think it's where we need to look to the future versus kind of looking to the past and rescue, because all of the studies I've seen, I don't see studies that look to the future of saying, what might rescues look like once AI is involved, or more robotics or things like that. So today's show, though, dun, 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 dun. All right. We are going to talk about Sophie's Choice, Hobson's Choice, how artificial intelligence is and will change rescues, and also spend time analyzing a safety response article from the Journal of Contingencies and Crisis Management. So there's sound methodology there, impeccable experts, but I think it's a good example of how research in this vein becomes patterned, and how ultimately we experience struggles to offer fresh recommendations. So let us begin. It is Sophie's Choice. Okay. I wasn't familiar with this. This is new to me. Sophie's Choice is the title of a 1979 novel by William Sterun. It's about a Polish woman in a Nazi concentration camp who is forced to decide which of her two children, it was, I believe, a 10-year-old boy or a 7-year-old girl, will live and which will die. And Meryl Streep gained an Oscar for her starring role in the 1982 film version of this. So basically, in that scenario, Sophie's Choice, in that scenario, the German, the Nazi concentration camp guard said to the mother, that you have to pick which one of your children will die, basically. And if you don't pick, then they will both die. So you have to pick one, and she picks the boy. Now there isn't ever a rationale, that's given for this, and of course it is a heart-wrenching decision. I've read subsequent articles saying, well, of course, the boy would be older, would be, more likely to participate in work camp efforts and things like that. But, who knows? But, so Sophie's Choice now is the phrase has become shorthand for a terrible choice between two difficult options. And we can see this in state budgets, okay? When lawmakers state that all cuts they'll inflict pain, no matter what we do. Every cut is going to inflict pain. Our job is to inflict as little pain as possible. That's a Sophie's Choice. So if we choose this, somebody is going to suffer. And if we choose this other option, somebody is going to suffer. And if we do nothing, both groups are going to suffer. So that is a Sophie's Choice. So a Sophie's Choice is used in reference to a difficult situation in which a person must choose between two equally deserving alternatives. So do we fund the roads or do we fund education? Or, in the case of the novel, do I choose for my daughter to live or do I choose for my son to live? So this deals with moral dilemmas which play into safety situations. We haven't talked about that as much in the Safety Doc podcast, and also the ethics that come into play with safety. So we're going to get into that today. And so the following is an example of a moral dilemma adapted from Moral Reasoning by Victor Gracian. Okay. I'm going to read this and then we're going to talk about it. The overcrowded lifeboat. In 1842, the ship struck an iceberg and more than 30 survivors were crowded into a lifeboat intended to hold 7. As the storm threatened, it became obvious the lifeboat would have to be lightened if anyone were to survive. The captain reasoned that the right thing to do in this situation was to force some individuals to go over the side and drown. Such an action, he reasoned, was not unjust to those thrown overboard, for they would have drowned anyway. If he did nothing, however, he would be responsible for the deaths of those whom he could have saved. Some people opposed the captain's decision. They claimed that if nothing were done and everyone died as a result, no one would be responsible for these deaths. On the other hand, if the captain attempted to save some, he could do so only by killing others, and their deaths would be his responsibility. This would be worse than doing nothing and letting all die. The captain rejected this reasoning. Since the only possibility for rescue required great efforts of rowing, the captain decided that the weakest would have to be sacrificed. In this situation, it would be absurd, he thought, to decide by drawing lots who should be thrown overboard. As it turned out, after days of hard rowing, the survivors were rescued and the captain was tried for his action. If you had been on the jury, how would you have decided? So this really shows the rational side of the person, the captain. Presumably he's doing the utilitarian calculation, saying, the lifeboat is made to hold this many people. It's overloaded. When the rough seas come in, it's going to, capsize, fill with water. We're going to lose everybody. And this is what we need to do to ensure survival of some of the people. Otherwise, we're going to lose everybody. But certainly a moral dilemma that falls within a Sophie's choice. And these situations present themselves frequently in life, for us. The Sophie's Choice. So, what would you do if you were on the jury and you heard this? So, it's very interesting, the moral dilemma that you can go back and forth with on this. And I'm going to talk somewhat about how this relates to the boat rescue on 9/11/2001. We did not run into a Sophie's Choice scenario, and I believe because the boat rescue was moving at a steady pace. We had educated people. The profile of the people that were being rescued, largely they worked in finance, had advanced degrees, were 40 years old, things that all contributed to more rational or conscious behavior. Now, it's weird because if any of these folks would have really sat down and thought about, we have there's hundreds of thousands of us here, and how in the world is this rescue going to happen? And no one's ever trained for this, this is irrational. But just saying, this is one of those situations where if the lines wouldn't have been moving, or let's say that there was fog or a storm that was going to be moving in and people were aware of this, would we have seen a Sophie's Choice? Would we have seen a preference made by captains to rescue women and children first off of the island, Manhattan Island, and later, rescue males? Or how would that have happened? I mean, it would have kind of played out a little bit like a Titanic scenario. It could have played out that way, but it didn't. We didn't see a Sophie's Choice happen. Something else happened. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But Sophie's Choice could have definitely been a part of the 9/11 boat rescue and would have added a very rich layer into the research component into that. So we talked about the overcrowded lifeboat. Let us change to a different scenario. Think about this one for a little bit. The costly underwater tunnel. All right, here is the scenario. An underwater tunnel is being constructed despite an almost certain loss of lives. Now, in these big construction projects, there's typically a calculation of loss of life. Like when they built Hoover Dam, the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, you build those with the assumption that there will be so many fatalities, just because of the complexity, the risks that's taken with with doing those. So that's kind of factored in. But anyway, let's talk about this. So an underwater tunnel is being constructed despite an almost certain loss of several lives. Presumably, the expected loss is a calculated cost that society is prepared to pay for having the tunnel. And society doesn't make any such calculation, okay? So it's this calculated cost that society is prepared to pay for having the tunnel. But again, this is all done behind the scenes. Society is either voting for or against the tunnel. They're not voting, for their tax dollars, or if they're voting on the tunnel project or whatever. They're not saying, we'll vote for it, and plus we understand it's likely 15 people will perish or something in the construction of this. So at a critical moment, when a fitting must be lowered into place, a workman is trapped in a section of the partially laid tunnel. If it is lowered, it will surely crush the trapped workman to death. Yet, if it is not, in a time-consuming rescue, the workman is attempted, the tunnel will have to be abandoned and the whole project begun anew. 2 workmen have already died in the project as a result of anticipated and unavoidable conditions in the building of the tunnel. What should be done? Was it a mistake to begin the tunnel in the first place? But don't we take such risk all the time? We could get some clarity about this example by asking what the police would do if they are informed that the work foreman has authorized the deliberate crushing of a worker. I suspect that he would immediately be arrested for murder. With these tunnels and bridges, the moral principle involved with the deaths is a simple one. Because of the projects, fewer people will die later. So, for example, in car crashes, if the tunnels are there to transport, clean water, people aren't going to die of cholera or cholera, I should say, and other waterborne illnesses. So, in the long run, by building the tunnel, you're going to save lives. Fewer people are going to die later. This is a compelling reason for my book, Lessons Lower Manhattan, to inform people of critical decisions and discretion present at the time of chaos. Because the fact is, whatever you do in the moment and as you do it, for a group, okay, you're going to have intended or unintended consequences on that. So, the fact that, overloading the boats, they did overload most of the rescue boats. They talked about this to a certain point, and then that was it. But, what if you get to the point where, there's an additional attack? A plane comes in very close to the harbor. There's people are being, burned because of the heat. Do you choose then to overload the boat even more, knowing that you risk a capsize or the boat sinking in order to get these people off, or do you not? So, you can have these type of dilemmas that surface. So, Hobsons Choice, HOBSON''S Choice, Hobsons Choice. The meaning of Hobsons Choice is that there's no real choice at all, okay? The only option being to either accept or refuse the offer that's given to you. So you give an offer of saying, you can do this, and if you don't, then that's fine. This is your choice. Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. A choice exists. You can make the choice. You can take it or you can leave it. Okay? But if you leave it, you have nothing. There's nothing else there. So it originated with Thomas Hobson who lived from 1545 to 1631. He ran a thriving carrier and horse rental business in Cambridge, England. So it was around the turn of the 17th century. Hobson rented out horses mainly to Cambridge University students. but refused to hire them out other than in the order that he chose. The choice his customers were given was this or none. Quite literally, not their choice, but Hobsons' choice. So the 9/11 Lower Manhattan rescue was ultimately a Hobsons choice, although, so you didn't have any other avenues of escape from the island. You were trapped. There was some restoration in the afternoon of subway, but only to limited areas. The most viable option to get off of Lower Manhattan definitely was via boat. So that was your choice. You could take the boat or you could not, because you were not moving up beyond, where the Twin Towers were. You're going to stay down in Lower Manhattan. What you're going to do, I don't know. But amazing. So you have this Hobsons choice. It wasn't like you could do this, you could do, instead you could do the subway, or you could walk, or you could go over the bridges. Remember, the bridges were closed. And Manhattan is an island, so it was pretty isolated. And the attack was also, while the attacks on the Twin Towers occurred, and concluded before noon, it was in the afternoon that Tower 7 fell, and there was this thought yet that there could be boats with explosives in the harbor that could be ramming other boats, that there could be explosives on the bridges, that, this was an event like, none other. So really, with Hobsons' choice, your path for rescue was going to be the boat. So either it was a take it or leave it, and people took it. Sometimes when you get into that, when you get into high chaos situations, this whole take it or leave it, it's really good, because it eliminates this whole heuristics process of having to analyze this option against this option against this option against this option. When it is either like you get on here or you stay. And if you get on here, you're going to get off the island and likely to a much safer area. You do that, okay? So that is your Hobsons choice. You see this at airports too. Okay, I talked to one of the researchers. It was actually Paul Rapp, Dr. Paul Rapp, head of military medicine, was talking kind of about a Hobsons choice scenario. And he said, you know what? He was stranded at an airport and in Europe, and the flight that he had was canceled. There wasn't another flight to get back to the States. So his choice was, we can fly you to London, which isn't where you want to go, but we can fly you to London. And then once you're in London, you can see what options you have there, or you can stay here and, eventually wait to see if other options develop, at the airport. But we can fly you to London. It's not your destination. So what he did is he flew to London. He said, well, hey, I got to go to London. And then from there, I have a different set of options available to me. So I don't necessarily probably have a Hobsons choice. I have different choices available to me. And maybe I can fly to different, destinations to get back then and connect up and get to the United States, which he did. So, dun, 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 dun. All right. I'm going to talk about a research article, called, it was in the Journal of Contingencies and Crisis Management in 2014. The article is titled Cognitive Correlates of Improvised Behavior in Disaster Response, the Cases of the Murrah Building, that was Oklahoma City, and the World Trade Center. It's by David Madonka, Gary Webb, Carter Butts, and James Brook, all university faculty in the United States, all recognized as disaster safety experts. Their work, folks, is impeccable. This is a very comprehensive, very detailed study that they assembled. So what I'm going to do is point out some parts of this study. I wouldn't say necessarily that I don't agree with. I think there's a alternate way to analyze what they're analyzing, these rescues and focusing on the responders. There's a different there's a different way to do that. There's probably many different ways. And in my book, I go about a completely different strategy of doing that than what they do. So not trying to say that what they did was wrong. These are very highly regarded safety experts, but I think that the window is open to, look out and think of some different ways to understand how safety response, has occurred in the past, and actually like why it has occurred and then the way that it unfolded, but then to look to the future, because safety response is going to be completely different for the next generation and the generation after that. The human element in safety response will be continually diminished as AI, robotics, algorithms come in. We already know for a fact, drones are out there. We have search drones, which can go out and just in the last year or two, if a missing person, the strategies for, searchers and, search dogs and their handlers and two-way communications and how all of that would set up, and, the dogs would fatigue after a certain time. And but yet, now we can bring in drones to augment that process, and drones with heat sensors, drones that can map coordinates, GPS coordinates down, to the foot, and have resulted in successful, location of individuals. Of course, there are limitations to that, in densely wooded areas and things like that, but we are going to, I believe, see a continued expansion of AI and robotics and algorithms and technology to augment rescue processes. So let me read the abstract from this study. So it says, while emergency response actions are known to range from conventional to improvised, less is known about the thinking processes that underlie these actions. This paper presents a statistical analysis of cognition and behavior reported by police personnel who responded to two significant U.S. disasters, the 1995 bombing of the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City and the 2001 attack on the World Trade Center in New York City. The results suggest the prominence of conventional behavior coupled with cognitive processes closely tied to recognition, and of improvised behaviors that are linked to more explicit reasoning processes. Don't worry, folks. I'm going to break this down a little bit. The results underscore the value of exploring cognitive foundations of both conventional and improvised behaviors to enrich understanding of human response to disaster. Something that was mentioned a few times right away in the abstract was the value of improvised response, meaning that you are taking into consideration the unique context and situation, which is changing, plus the people around you, their skill set, the tools around you, and making the most of that to construct a response to the situation. Just in that abstract, that is not at all how we respond to, for example, active shooter situations in schools. We follow very, very rote processes, run, hide, fight. And when we get locked in to rote responses that eliminate an improvised component and the ability to use discretion, it's not good, folks, because we then have a linear response to something that's very chaotic. Okay. So you want to be able to identify what's happening in that chaos, and then what opportunities are there for your safety versus like, I've been trained to do this, I'm going to do this no matter what. And it's like, oh, there might be other options that are present to you and better options. You might want to go with those. So interesting article. Now I don't know if, my first thought on this was looking at this and saying, I don't think I would compare the Murrah Building and the World Trade Center. And I'll get into that in a little bit. I don't think I would make that comparison. But let's talk about improvisation. So improvisation in emergency response has long been viewed as an activity in which creativity is exercised under time constraint in order to meet response objectives. That's from Klein and White. David Klein, researcher I've mentioned, did a lot of work with the military. Carl Weick, an icon in sense making. So yet only a few studies have sought to discover and explore the cognitive and behavioral processes that underlie improvisation, thus leaving the improvisation construct unpacked. So improvisation. But this isn't what we teach. Folks, this isn't what we teach. We don't teach people to improv in the moment. We teach people to follow a protocol. We teach pilots to follow a protocol. Sully, okay, the Miracle on the Hudson, to follow a protocol. And yet right away in this research paper, in this article in the Journal of Contingencies and Crisis Management, 4 of the top disaster safety experts in the United States and arguably in the world come out right away and say improvisation is understudied. It's a huge component to emergency response. And yet in reality, we don't do this. We do not foster improvisation. We try to make everything linear and not improv. We try to get it to standard operating procedure. So it's an interesting way to start an article. I agree with what they're saying, but this isn't the way things are done. Okay. So yeah, I agree. We don't teach improvisation, and we have to teach improvisation. It's like you have a fire, you go out in the hallway, and suddenly, the hallway is blocked off, and you can't get down that hallway because there's smoke and fire. So what do you do next? Yeah, this is the drill. Every time there's a fire drill, you go down this hallway and go out. So what do you do next? And if the hallway's starting to, fill up with smoke, that ability to have those improvisational safety skills. So I already talked, about the run, hide, fight for active shooter instance and how that is just getting so ingrained, when I think, that closes that opportunity for sense making of context and situation. And I've always said, think, act, fight. Once you think, okay, you're pausing, you're thinking, you're assessing your context and situation, and then you're acting. Run, hide, fight means no matter what happens, you're running, okay? And that may not be your best option, so it takes away that thinking component. So I guess I'm going to say my issues with the article, and I hate to frame it that way because I respect these people, I respect the work that they've done. But, frankly, the work that I'm doing, the experts that I'm working with, we have a different stance on how we approach this. And I think both of these stances offer valuable insight. And I think together they make for a stronger knowledge base and a stronger way to look at response and preparedness. But let me tell you, first of all, again, I said the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, okay, that was a single event in one location. Manhattan Island was an island, okay? Population dense island. Many, many more people than Oklahoma City. So you're comparing these two. Oklahoma City is a single event. The World Trade Center attack was part of coordinated attacks in a massive population dense area. So when the Murrah building was being attacked, there was not this thought, and I remember when the Murrah building was attacked. I know where I was hearing the news. But there wasn't a thought that there would be coordinated ongoing attacks or that this was, potentially going to spill over into other cities. As horrible as it was an attack that then had a definite start and an end point to it. Whereas the World Trade Center attacks, arguably, and I make this argument, I said that the attack, the chaos situation where people thought they were under attack was literally about 12 hours long. If you look at when there were 5 warships deported from Norfolk, not knowing if the harbor was mined, not knowing if there was going to be some other, detonation device that had been planted. Again, you had multiple sites that were struck. This was nothing like the Murrah building, okay? I think it was actually more, like maybe a hurricane, although a hurricane you have forewarning on. I can see where both of these, you'd pick the Murrah Building WTC because they were, unanticipated. But I don't think it's an equitable comparison. I don't know what I would compare it to. I guess I'd have to sit and think more about that. I just don't see this again. And with Murrah, you didn't have to worry about an evacuation of people. You had exits out of that, where again, Manhattan Island is an island, a population dense island. So the other part too is the national impact of the World Trade attacks. The World Trade attacks actually involved a move to DEFCON level 3 at 10:53 Eastern Time by the U.S. Strategic Command, or STRATCOM, STRATCOM. So moving to DEFCON 3 is huge, okay? Probably saw this in the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick, but once you start progressing through DEFCONs, when you get to DEFCON 1, that's like, that's war. So that's when you're launching your ICBMs. If you move from DEFCON 3 to DEFCON 2, you are equipping your long-range destroyers with nuclear missiles at that point. So you're one step away. And so, you have this situation where this is a international event. And there was very sketchy communication between Russia and the U.S. during this. Very hard to get a hold of President Bush when he was on the plane. People in different bunkers, the chain of command. There's been many revisions since 2001 to make that more streamlined. But you had an entire world that was on edge because, if you go down to DEFCON 2, if there's another attack, if there was something that had been planted that suddenly, explodes, or a low-level, nuclear explosion or something like that, you go down to DEFCON 2, a prudent military force of Russia, China, whatever, is going to change their DEFCON level and start to prepare, because they don't know if they're going to be attacked or if there is some first strike initiation that's going to be happening out of the United States. It wouldn't be logical, but again, we've seen the movie War Games and things, and there have been, numerous times in history with the Soviet Union and with the United States where we have come very close to activating an exchange of ICBMs. So again, we compare this. I think the rescuers, the Murrah building, plus what they would have gotten through text messages. You didn't have smartphones back then. Smartphones really not too much in 2001, although you would have had, more, the internet was more developed, so you would have had access, if you had access to a computer on what was happening. But I don't think it's fair to compare right away these two events, because I think the rescuers at the Murrah building would not have felt that there was going to be a subsequent attack, or that this was part of this national or international event that could rapidly escalate. And I think that was there with the World Trade Center, definitely, and the responders. And anything could go, with that, one more attack, what else was waiting? And if you're a responder, boy, that puts a lot of pressure on you. So we have the Murrah building, which was an event that concluded, a disaster event, and then it became a rescue. And I'm saying the World Trade Center, the rescuers came in while that event was still ongoing. And I'm saying it was going for 12 hours. We didn't have the collapse of World Trade Center 7 until I believe, about 5 p.m. in the afternoon after the initial attacks, shortly before 9. So I think right there are two stark differences. Well, we discount the advances in technology, and I mentioned it right here, that at the Murrah building, you would have maybe been able to get messages by text, off your phone in 95, but you didn't have a smartphone, and even the internet was still in kind of its infancy, a lot of dial-up and things like that. By 2001, you had advanced more past that. So you would have had more technology, more information coming out to you in 2001 than in 1995. And today, imagine the technology that would come out to you. So I think right there was a difference. And where this research article, instead of looking to the past and comparing the two, I think there's, like I said, big differences between the two contexts and scenarios and the two events. I think you can also look to the future. Like at the Fukushima nuclear disaster, there was a person that worked for Google, who I hope to have on the show, talked about how the communication system went down and then used his Google phone to hook into satellite and Google Maps to find his way back home. But on this way home is also being, and it's very hard to find, through Japan, the roads aren't laid out in grids like they are in the U.S. But he's being told by people that he's passing on his way in. They're getting ready to evacuate the major cities, and there's a radiation cloud coming in. He's trying to get back to his family. So this whole thing of misinformation, too, I think in the future isn't going to be as prevalent in rescue events. I think information is going to be much more timely, much more accurate. So, okay. So first, time pressure, high consequences, and complexity are expected to push response personnel towards decision making. When this scene is more familiar, a recognition prime decision-making model is expected to operate. So that's from the article. So again, first, time pressure. So you want to respond as fast as you can, save as many lives as you can. High consequences, like, you're entering, for example, the Twin Towers. Can things still collapse? Got to get to people as soon as you can. They might be bleeding out, whatever. And complexity are expected to push response personnel towards decision making. So yeah, you have to make decisions. You have to use discretion, and you have to make decisions. Maybe Sophie's Choice decisions. There was a major industrial explosion about 30 miles from where I live a month ago, and there were 5 people killed. One person had both of his legs amputated. A train car had fallen on his legs and crushed them. So a surgeon had to come on the scene, and at that point, make a decision of, basically at that point, what would it be? It wasn't a Sophie's Choice. It wasn't, that we can not amputate, and you're going to have damaged and crushed legs that are going to be non-functional, but you'll have legs. Or we can amputate. No, it was a Hobsons Choice of we need to amputate your legs to save your life because you're bleeding out your arteries, and we have to do this, and that was it. There was no other choice. So when this scene is more familiar, a recognition prime decision-making model is expected to operate. Yes, yeah, true. I mean, there's certain things after you respond to so many fires, ambulance calls, and things like that. There are things that you recognize as a pattern. That wasn't present at 9/11. That was so far outside of the realm of what anyone had ever experienced. Imagine the Twin Towers collapsing. So recognition primed, I mean, some people were saying they didn't even know where they were because of the dust and the sheer, damage that had been done. So you're trying that recognition primed decision-making model. Yeah, I think you try to get there, but at the same time, I think you look and you're like, I'm outside of my torus. We talked about this, our everyday thing. Even if you're a rescuer, like this is so far out there, that what is the new reality of what is happening? Like, I don't understand this landscape. I've never trained for any of this. And I think once you stop trying to fit this into something you've trained for and say, this is a whole new ball game. So let's operate under the new rules that we have here, the new context, the new situation that we've never practiced, we've never seen before. Then you enter this new torus, which brings some stability out of chaos, and you can create some systems in this torus that you're never going to return to. But I think this article missed out. So this is partially true for 9/11. The missing term here is discretion. Okay, push people toward decision making. No, you push people toward discretion. Okay, and using their bias, their previous knowledge. Also, much clearer perception at the Murrah building that attack was a single event. We talked about that, and there would not be future attacks. So I think at the Murrah building, you could pattern, you could recognition prime decision making of what had really happened. Or, I mean, it could be similar to maybe if there was a major explosion because of a gas leak in a building or something like that. Like you could have some sense making of understanding what you're dealing with. At 9/11, that wasn't there. You had to move completely outside into a brand new torus. So, and again, those heightened risk, you had that ongoing event. So, some conclusions. Okay, one implication of this study for the practice of emergency management is the relatively untapped potential of structured analysis of after-action narratives for informing process-level explanations of how organizations deal with disaster. The after-action narratives. Okay, folks, right there. That's interviewing the people who were involved in this as responders, okay, and gathering whatever data you can get from interviews or, the narratives, what they've written down for notes, what they might have communicated, that you're transcribing that, trying to understand those narratives. The after-action narratives analyzed here suggest the potential of a structured approach to understanding large-scale response to disaster. I guess, if you want to do a massive transcription, interview a lot of people, take radio communications, take all of that down, and then do a thorough qualitative analysis of that, code it out, come up with your constructs and themes. Yes. To me, though, that seems like pretty obvious that you could come up with that. And again, these are moments in time. 10, 15 years from now, it's not going to be like this with the way that artificial intelligence is going to come into play. We talk about large-scale responses. Back in the 50s, it was Bert the Turtle. You'd have it on TV, Bert the Turtle, and if you hear the air raid siren, you duck and cover. Come on. So there are, operational responses, in contingency plans with the government. What if there was a nuclear detonation in a major city? How would you respond to that? But it's nothing you practice. I live outside of, Madison, Wisconsin, which would be an ICBM target. So, and we don't have drills on how to practice for that. So I kind of, I get what they're saying here. But at the same time, you can't take one disaster and compare it to another disaster. And some things missing on this too are like, how did staging work for both of these? Staging of resources and then deciding how you're going to conduct your search and rescue, and also your debriefing of people in your critical, cumulative stress disorder management with people. The fact is, you are going to have quadrants, created. Let's say a tornado strikes and wipes out a large, city. You're going to have quadrants that you can develop, and you can go in and from up above identify these quadrants and pinpoint exactly where they are with drones, start to do visual surveillance of these quadrants, things you couldn't do 10 years ago, unless, you had a helicopter and stuff. But you can actually get in with heat sensors and drones and things like that. So it's going to be much different, as we look to the future, which I think we need to do. I don't think we need to look to the past of saying, let's compare 9/11 to the Murrah building. I don't know. I just don't get that much out of that. When methods are compiling and analyzing after-action reports are ad hoc, it is difficult to compare results within or across organizations over time or across events. It's difficult. It's also going to be impossible. You'll never be able to do it. You can't do it in schools. Like you can't compare. You have a district. You have 10 schools. You can't take 10 elementaries. You can't take elementary A compared to B compared to C because the neighborhood is different. The teachers are different. That, turnover level, the bias of the teacher or the principal, the discretion where the priorities lie for different trainings and things like that, who does drills, how they document. So it's all going to be different. You can look at the unit, which is the school. So I think, again, it's pointed out in the article, it's difficult to compare results within or across organizations over time or events. True. And the fact is, though, you're missing out on mentioning the advances in technology and the rapid sharing of information now and validifying information, and the fact that people are going to when I interviewed the folks with ISS 24/7 working on security with the NFL, they were saying, even with the most severe hurricanes coming through now, you still can largely text. You still have that available to you. So you can go in and you can text, even if everything else is down. And I think those systems will just get to be more effective. So I think you're going to get information to people and GPS locating. And, I mentioned this too. When I was at Disney back in March, we had the wristbands where they could, the park folks identified who you were the moment you came in. They could GPS locate you. They knew who, it was also your pass into your room. You didn't have to carry a wallet. You could use it for things like that. But, and we see that as built into phones and stuff like this. And I just think we're discounting technology when we do reports like this. And this is 2014. I'm saying you need to look at technology, information awareness, and AI, and disaster as its own unit. So I guess in closing with today's podcast, we covered a couple different areas, but I recently purchased this book. So if you're watching, it's American Dunkirk, is by, it is by James, Kendra, and Tricia Wachtendorf, who also did a paper before this came out on the boat rescue, Lower Manhattan. Excellent paper. They centered their work on distributed sense making, which I definitely think was present. And my work incorporates that. That I don't disagree that was there, but I also believe that transference was a huge part of that rescue, and I get very deep into why I believe that. I'm going to be working with some additional experts, and actually some from the field experts, in identifying why I believe that was the positioning. So my book, Lessons of Lower Manhattan, is going to have a different take on why that rescue was as effective as it was. And one of the things, too, flat out with that rescue of Lower Manhattan, yes, of how effective, and we definitely know the skill level of the tugboat captains and captains in general involved. But it was a clear day. It was almost a perfect weather day, which is not always the case in Lower Manhattan. So you had 10 miles of visibility, temperatures about 80 degrees, calm seas. It didn't get dark until after 7 o'clock at night. So these attacks happen in the morning. You can use daylight. So you had a lot of things going for you just because the weather was good. Imagine it's a little bit foggy, that after the attack happens at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which means the rescue is happening when it's dark. Is it the same rescue at all? Absolutely not. We know that the dark innately changes people and their reactions. The panic sets in the dark. So I think there's some things too that I bring to the table in my work, which are going to be different than what some of the other people have brought. But certainly it's very well done. I appreciate the book. I just have a different perspective and the people that I'm working with and bringing that forward in my book, Lessons of Lower Manhattan. And I think if you read the two books in conjunction, they will definitely complement each other. So with that said, this is the new boom arm, studio arm, boom arm, and very appreciative to have this technology in place. I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for the listeners. The support for the show continues to be strong. I do have, again, guests coming on. We're booking out. I am going to be a guest on a few shows, the Wait, What If podcast. That should be we recorded that. That's being edited. It should be maybe in the next week or two. And I will be a guest on the Sustainable Living podcast with Marianne West, conducting that interview next week. So I have those coming up, and we'll definitely link those out. You can follow me on Twitter at safetyphd. Just go on Twitter or go to safetyphd.com. That's the webpage. You can learn more about me, read some of the blog posts. I am having a refresh of the Safety Doc design, and also the webpage will be rebuilt under a WordPress template. So it is going to look different to focus more on the podcasts, which do come out weekly. This is podcast number 36 weeks in a row. So we're going to put more emphasis on the podcast. And, we're going to update the logo a little bit to just a hint. It's not, I'm going to keep actually that design in the background just for that sign, which will be redone just to be a little vintage here. But it's not going to have my face on it, going a little different color scheme on that. So anyway, thank you very much, and continue to think analytically. Be safe, everybody. Be safe. Thank you very much.